Hello, beautiful people. So, I'm going to talk about something completely different today. I'm going to talk about type 2 diabetes and how you can prevent yourself getting it, or if you are already pre diabetic or have type 2 diabetes, how you can alleviate some of the problems. Now, it's all to do with our insulin systems. So, insulin is a hormone that's released by our pancreas, and it's released into the bloodstream when the blood has very high levels of sugar in it. So, what happens is that when we eat food, particularly what's called high GI food, that's high glycemic index carbohydrates. And I tend to think of those as the white carbohydrates. So, sugar, white flour that you find in bread and pasta, biscuits, cakes, pastries, that sort of thing. And also potatoes and like ripe bananas. What happens is when you eat these foods, as you're chewing them, the saliva in your mouth contains an enzyme called amylase. You may remember it from your science education pre-16. And this amylase starts to break down the carbohydrates into glucose. So you're already getting like a dose of glucose entering your bloodstream as soon as you start chewing those foods. Now, our body has to maintain a very stable level of glucose in our blood because although our brain requires glucose as an energy source, it's the only energy source our brain can actually use, it can't cope with too much or too little. So if you think about like children, who get given a whole load of sweets or whatever and they end up on a sugar rush, that's the brain getting too much glucose. Or if you've ever had what I call a hyperglycemic low or a blood sugar low and you start getting like shaky, that's because your blood sugar has dropped too low. So it's really important we maintain a stable blood sugar level. But we don't just get glucose from carbohydrates. Our body can also process proteins and fats to make glucose. So we don't have to eat carbohydrates, but I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat carbohydrates. What I'm saying is that you want to go for what we call low GI carbohydrates. So these are things like whole grains, brown rice, brown wheat, whole wheat. And because they don't get broken down in the mouth, so they have to go down into the stomach. They get broken down very slowly, and as they pass into the small intestine, so then the glucose is released very, very slowly into our bloodstream, and the insulin isn't triggered. Now, the problem with diabetes 2 is it results from the insulin system being triggered way too much. So most of our diets actually trigger our insulin system several times a day. If you think about like traditional Aboriginal cultures, they didn't eat processed carbs, or they don't eat processed carbs, and so they're not triggering their insulin system. And the insulin system is actually like an emergency measure for when we happen to find a beehive and eat a whole load of honey. And then it's like the insulin kicks in, it's like, okay, let's get this blood sugar down before it affects our brains. Now, if you control your insulin release, you will also help to stabilize your weight. Because when you eat high GI foods like pasta with fat, or like fried potatoes or whatever, the insulin is triggered immediately and it grabs hold of that fat and it puts it all around your middle. It actually deposits it as fat. So if you never trigger your insulin system, it's not going to take that fat and deposit it as a layer of fat in your body. The fat will be used as an energy source. It will be broken down and the energy will be released very slowly. Now, if you think about most like weight loss programs, particularly, these weight loss, well, not weight loss foods, but, these Weight Watcher foods that you can buy in supermarkets and things. If you actually look at the ingredients, they're all what they call low fat items, but they're all very high in sugar or low GI carbohydrates. Now, okay, you're not going to put on weight because there's no fat to deposit, but you're still triggering your insulin system massively. Every time you eat them, you're getting a rush of insulin. And gradually, when you repeatedly trigger that insulin system, it gradually breaks down and it won't trigger anymore, which is what type 2 diabetes is. It's where your insulin system is just not being triggered. So when you do eat high processed carbohydrates, the sugar is not being removed from the blood. Because what insulin does is it removes the sugar from the blood and deposits it as glycogen in the liver. So if you've not got any insulin, then your blood sugar level is raising higher and higher. And that's when, you end up in these, diabetic comas and things like that, because the brain can't cope with those high levels of sugar. So you find that, people who do have type 2 diabetes, they have to eat regularly to maintain their blood sugar, because they can't afford for it to drop completely. But on the other hand, they can't eat like sugary products, because then that makes their blood sugar too high. And they're only given those high sugar products when their blood sugar falls dangerously low and they quickly need a boost of sugar. But people have really got it into their heads that fats are bad and that they make you overweight. And this is not true. If you're not triggering your insulin system, then the fats won't make you fat. They won't get deposited in your body. And in fact, it's really important to eat fat. Our brain in particular is virtually all fat, and all our body cells, the membranes of our body cells, are made from fat. Our nerves are surrounded in a sheath of fat. So if you're not eating fat, then you're not being able to regenerate your cells and the protective layer around your nerve cells properly. So we're basically, animal fat. So if you eat animal fats, that's okay. You don't really have to worry about, what fats you eat. However, I would suggest that you eat organic animal produce as much as you can, because the chemicals that they put on the land that animals eat, and the chemicals that they give to animals, are what they call lipophilic, which means that they are attracted to fat. So when you're eating animal fat, you're eating a very high concentration of the chemicals that they put on the land or give to the animals. So I would highly recommend, at least, if you use cow's milk, to buy organic cow's milk. Now, if you don't eat animal products, it's really important you eat a very wide range of plant oils. So I'm talking about olive oil. Hemp seed oil is really good. Flaxseed oil, walnut oil. In fact, lots of nuts and seeds are really high in plant fats, in good plant fats. But make sure they're fresh. You don't want to be eating rancid plant fats. One other thing about fruit. Fruit juice is also very high GI. It will trigger your insulin system very quickly as soon as it sort of hits your mouth. Whole fruit or fruit smoothies that contain the whole fruit, they're not great, because basically what it is like fruit. The sugar is contained within cellulose walls, and as you eat the fruit, most of that sugar is protected as it goes down into your digestive system before it's released. So it's released quite slowly. As soon as you blend fruit, you break down those cellulose walls, then you're getting that instant release of that fruit sugar, and that will trigger your insulin. But I do also recommend that if you eat fruit, that you eat it on its own. So I tend to, I don't eat fruit actually that often, but when I do, I have like a fruit meal, and I'll wait about 3 hours after I've eaten proteins or fats. And after I've eaten the fruit, I'll wait a good hour before I eat something else. And that's because fruit is very highly digestible. And if you mix it with other foods, the fruit is digested quickly, but everything else is digested very slowly, and the fruit ends up fermenting while it's waiting for all the rest of the food to be processed. So I'm just going to check my notes, because I had to make some notes here to make sure that I got all this covered. Yeah, I think I covered everything that I was going to say. So if you've got any questions or comments, yeah, please put them in the comment chat below. So I hope you found that helpful. Just in case you want to know, I'm not a medical doctor, but I do have I am a doctor of biochemistry from a very previous life. So I do understand some of the science behind this, and I have done quite a bit of research about it. So fats are good. It's processed food, and particularly white carbohydrates, that are bad, and you'd do well to avoid them as much as you can, so you're not triggering your insulin system. Okay, I hope you found that helpful and interesting, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Loads of love. Bye.